Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the unrelenting push of mass migration from the third world or anywhere but the third world of black and brown peasants and pushing them into the white West. And the globalists are doing this with absolute grim determination without the consent of the local people. Indeed, they've effectively disenfranchised the entire Western white diaspora in order to push their globalist agenda, and mass migration being a very central part of that. But given it's so unpopular and so outrageous and suspending the legal rights of millions, that sort of thing, they have to have useful propaganda talking points to shame and blame and just silence any critics or even anyone that asks a question. And they're you're a racist, you're a Nazi, you're this, they're fascist, and I mean that's all. And of course the very helpful invocation of the Holocaust. So if you're against illiterate black peasants coming from Africa, then you support the Holocaust, which means you're a Nazi, which means you're fucking Hitler. And so this is very much something that gets drawn out. And given the frequency with which the Holocaust is bandied around to silence anybody that disagrees with mass migration, we can it's worth exploring this. And so that'll be the purpose of this essay. Now I need to go back, and I've done a few videos on this before, but I'll just recap some of it. At the end of World War I, and certainly into the 1920s, given the Soviet Civil War, there was a large movement of Jewish people around Europe. So from Belarus and the Ukraine, particularly during the Holodomor and the famines around there, a lot of these Jewish people in particular, or Ukrainians and Belarusians, among them there were many Jews. Leon Trotsky, for example, one of the heavy hitters of the Bolshevik Revolution, came from sort of central Western Ukraine. So there's a lot of Jewish people moved into places like Poland, for example, Romania, and so on. At one stage, it was alleged that something like half the Jews in Europe were in Poland, which seems, based on the census data and so on from the day, that seems to be approximately correct. But there was a lot of movement following World War I. Borders were redrawn. There was a lot of suffering and hardship during that time. War-torn Europe, infrastructure had broken down, and economies had been almost destroyed. So there was a lot of moving around of people, Jews included. Now in Germany, when the Nazis came to government, or the National Socialist Workers' Party, as they were called, came to government, there were approximately 400,000 Jews in Germany. Now Germany at that time had a population of pushing 80 million, like 77 million or something like that. If you certainly have to include the Austrian union with Austria, which is German speaking. Now, if you're looking at, say, that the Jews represented maybe 0.5%, not just slightly less than 1% of the German population. So it's not a large diaspora in Germany. Quite a few of those Jews had really been there since the the time of say the late 1700s and early 1800s. So they weren't just blow-ins from, or some were, but they weren't all just blow-ins from the displaced people around Europe. So it was probably a bit of a stretch to question the loyalty of some of them that have been there for generations. But anyway, the Nazis were, as we all well know, I mean, this is beyond dispute, were very keen for the Jews to leave Germany. And so the Nazis put a lot of resources at the disposal of the Jewish diaspora, including interpreters, immigration agents, a government department. A lot of resources were put at the disposal of the Jewish diaspora in Germany to leave, to go to other countries, go anywhere, just please leave Germany. And they were even given subsidised train tickets to go to embassies, to be interviewed, to go to, try and get visas to go to America or wherever. And so a lot of resources put. Now, at the time, this was the Great Depression was in full swing at the time. We really need to understand that, because this is critical. Immigration was being shut down pretty much all over the world, with some very minor exceptions. So, the immigration for example, into the United States, the immigration of the 1920s was severely curtailed because of the Great Depression. There were already unemployment numbers of 25% plus. And so why would you have immigration at a time when you've got 25% unemployment? Now, the unemployment in say, other countries like Britain wasn't as high, but it was still very high. There were still millions of people out of work, and there were songs about it. One of the big songs going around at the time in England was a song called "Underneath the Arches," about how all these itinerant sort of workers, just labourers and unemployed people, how their bedtime, their bed at night was underneath the railway arches. That's hence the name of the song, "Underneath the Arches." In fact, you can still see that on YouTube if you search for it. So because of this, there was very few opportunities for immigration to anywhere. Now, you kind of had to have maybe two things in place. One is you had to have skills that still were very much needed. So guys like Einstein could still get a visa because he was a scientific genius, and anyone that had those top level skills and skills like it, or they had money, they could get visas without trouble. But the other people who either had unwanted skills and no skills, remember again the Great Depression, huge unemployment all across the Western world, and this was the backdrop that was around at the time that the Nazis were encouraging the Jews to leave Germany. Nobody was getting killed at this point. They were just being asked to leave, and we're given again a lot of help to do that. So of the 400,000 Jews, about half of them got visas to other countries such as the United States or Britain. Now, another factor, or the other factor that would help, if you had relatives that were reasonably well-to-do. So you could, put them up and look after them if they arrived in America or wherever it was. So the wealthier Jews in America could bring their relatives out, provided they sort of met all expenses and looked at. But others, if you didn't have relatives, you didn't have money, you didn't have needed qualifications, and the list of needed qualifications, of course, is very narrow again because of the high unemployment of the Great Depression. So about half the Jews got out, and half didn't, and they just didn't have the necessary requirements for getting a visa. So they ended up not doing so well. Now, some of those Jews didn't all go to the United States or Britain. Some of them went to neighbouring countries such as France. So there was a lot of Jews in Poland. Not that the Polish government made it that easy, but again, provided you had enough relatives, it would be okay. Other Jews went to Hungary and elsewhere around the place. Again, assuming they had relatives or some sort of connections there. Not all of these Jews spoke other languages, by the way. So a lot spoke English or had minimal English at least. So it was more difficult to go somewhere like France or Italy or somewhere like that, where it would have been a big adjustment to learn the language and develop local connections and so on. Now, one of the issues that whilst this is dressed up as these countries wouldn't let the Jews in because they're all fucking Nazis, they're all anti-Semitic, they're this or that. No, that's nonsense. Not that there wasn't anti-Semitic feeling around, there was, but that's not the issue. The issue was the Great Depression and the massive unemployment and the huge unpopularity of bringing in masses of people who had no qualifications would simply join the unemployment queues. So Einstein got a job straight away, but other people wouldn't have been so lucky, regardless whether they were Jewish or not. But there was plenty of Gentiles applying to go to the United States and wanted to go, but they were being refused as well. So the idea it was uniquely anti-Semitic is absurd and can be dismissed out of hand. Now, what happened afterwards? Once I guess just a couple of other things that are worth mentioning here. The Jews only wanted to go to rich white Western countries. They didn't want to go, and they could have easily have gone at any time to the poor African countries or poor countries around the place. They could have done that, but they didn't want to. They only wanted to go to the rich white countries, which was, and by the way, there's no problem with that. But they feel we have to go there. We don't want to go anywhere else. So they were preventing or refused to consider other options, and tried to mount a campaign of sort of moral shaming of any country that didn't take them, which was stepped up after the Holocaust. And we'll come back to that later. So once the attempts at say getting on ships and just getting on a ship and just arriving at the New York harbor and demanding to be allowed to dock and disembark, that's a blatant moral shaming attempt, and governments, including the United States government, refused entry to these people. Now, part of that is it joins the mythical sort of Moses and the Exodus type thing, which is deeply, deeply symbolic to the more devout folks in the Jewish diaspora. Moses leading the people away from the Pharaoh to the Promised Land, and the Promised Land, and this is again deeply symbolic. So this is and there was a movie made about, I think it was called Exodus, where there was the ship full of Jewish refugees in essence, and they want to dock somewhere, and no one's allowing them to dock. For again, the high unemployment, various political reasons. It's to reverse it and say it's purely a moral issue, and if you don't let them dock, you're a damn fascist, Nazi, Hitler, anti-Semite. That's to severe and in reductionism in its most wicked, in my view. But anyway, the remaining folks from the Jewish diaspora in Germany, which again are now representing about 1/5 of 1%, give or take, 1/5 of 1% of the population of Germany. So quite a small diaspora. They're not going to do so well, and let's be clear about that. Even so, the Jews that remained that ended up having skills that were useful to the Nazi war effort and that sort of stuff, they were given sort of honorary Gentile status, and Jews in say Romania and Hungary that were nominally German allies during the war. The Nazi government, whether they be considered ideological fanatics or not, they tended to leave that alone. And I've met Jewish guys, this is years ago, who were young men or 13, 14, 15 years old, who were Jewish in Hungary at the time, and when the war was on and there were Nazi officials running around. And sometimes the Nazis would come along with lists of Jewish people, but they weren't well qualified Jewish people. They were, the tinkers and the tailors. They weren't the people who were metallurgists and that sort of thing, and engineers, whatever. They weren't them. They would tend to leave them alone. And again, the honorary Gentile status stuff. Another guy, his dad was a local mayor in some Hungarian town or village, and again, the Nazi officials would turn up but it was with requests. They didn't push the point. If the local mayor said no, in one case it was a dentist, and the dentist was, I think, the only dentist in that part of the village, and the mayor said, well, we can't afford to lose our dentist, for goodness sake. So do you mind? And who was the guy I know who was a teenager at the time. He noted that the Nazis, the Nazi officials would back off. They wouldn't push it. They didn't try to push the mayor around or threaten him or something like that. It was just a request. Now, some of that was fairly sensible. Hungarian troops were fighting on the against the Soviet Union at the time, and so there was no point in pissing off the Hungarian government to any great extent. So you can understand that they were having to sort of, the Nazi officials were still having to operate within realpolitik. Their fanaticism would only go so far. But particularly in Poland, the amount of Jews there, which by the time that 1939 came around, something like 60% of total Jews in the greater European area were in Poland, which was where most of the activity, aided and abetted and supported by the Polish government, by the way, became very, very anti-Semitic, and that's where I think if you like, the central part of the Holocaust concept or Holocaust sort of machinery and administrative machinery in particular started to really bite, and where most of those deaths occurred, given again the concentration of Jews in Poland at the time. So now let's move forward here. It was mass murder on a grand scale. So what is the attitude, or what was the attitude of the Jewish activist propaganda diaspora after the war? And they've got genuine grievances to present. There's no question of that. So the idea is that if the West, because the Jews only want to go to the rich Western countries, if the West had accepted all these Jews, and really it was from Germany at the time, so again, 200,000 odd were accepted, so another 200,000 were not. But if the West had taken those 200,000 Jews, because the Jews in Poland and these other countries weren't applying at any greater or lesser numbers than any other group may or may not have applied to go to, for example, the US or Britain or somewhere. So if the argument goes, if the West had taken those 200,000 German Jews after 1933, particularly that symbolic exodus ship, then the Holocaust would never have occurred. Of course, that's an absolute, utter, outrageous travesty of common sense, because the majority of the Jews weren't in Germany. In fact, a very small proportion of the Jews in Europe, were in Germany, say less than 1/3 of 1%, or around 1/3 of 1% of the Jews in Europe were in Germany. So a tiny proportion of the Jews. So whether that 200,000 had come to America or not, or Britain or anywhere, out of Germany, that really, in the overall scheme of things, doesn't make a difference. But that's what the focus is on. Remember, the Jews elsewhere around Romania, whatever, they weren't applying to go to the US. Again, not in any greater numbers than the Gentiles or anyone else were, but because of the Great Depression, then it was a very tightly controlled thing. You must have skills. Now there was other issues at the time, and newspaper cartoons or whatever are dredged up to say that really it wasn't anything to do with the Depression. It wasn't anything to do with 25% plus unemployment. It was damn anti-Semitism by damn anti-Semites, and we're going to shame and blame the Gentiles because of that. And really, this is what the Holocaust sort of propaganda was about. It was to say, well, never again must we allow this to happen. And what caused it to happen well, it was the Nazis and everything. But what caused it to happen was the West refused to take in the Jews when they applied for well, not only refugee status, but they applied for immigrant visas to go to these other countries. And if only that had happened, that the Holocaust would never have taken place. Thus, the Holocaust is really kind of the fault of the Nazis, but more importantly, it's the fault of Gentiles everywhere. Gentiles everywhere must bear this guilt, and we won't let them forget it, and so on. So that's the architecture and the symbolism and the propaganda and the guilt tripping and the shaming all combined. Now, this is the same architecture, of course, that's used against the white Western countries, again, the Gentiles, to do the mass immigration that the globalists want to do. And, given that the similarity, and in fact, almost the exact same architecture and propaganda, we can only wonder what the activists who are pushing for the globalists that are pushing for mass migration, we can only wonder what their diaspora, original diaspora, may be. But we need to just understand that that's why the Holocaust is invoked with such frequency and such abandon and in my view, carelessness. Now, the reality again is, even if those 200,000 Jews have been given visas, whether it be refugee or an immigrant visa, doesn't matter, but visas, to go to another country, then that would have stopped the Holocaust, or it would never have happened. That's bullshit. Because by the time that there was, for example, the Jews in Poland or anywhere wanted to leave Europe, it was after war had been declared and there was a World War II was in full swing. It was at that point. Now, I don't want people to think that the Nazis were uniquely anti-Jewish. The Polish government didn't like the idea of that many Jews in Poland. That went down like a lead balloon in Poland. And if you look at the goings on at the time, the Jews would have a decent case for being mistreated even in Poland before the Nazis showed up. Similarly, the Soviet communist, Marxist, Bolshevik government of Stalin and those guys, that was very, I think, anti-Jewish as well in many ways. The Jewish kulaks who had some of the better farms around the Ukraine and so on, they were killed off and deprived, which is why many of them, of course, moved to Poland. But also it's viewed that people that were particularly devout, that spoke Yiddish in the home, because it's a form of sort of Hochdeutsch, it's got a lot of Germanic language origins. That was viewed with huge suspicion by the Soviet communists, and so people that were devout and spoke Yiddish at home or in their houses, the privacy of their houses, they were particularly targeted by the KGB and treated quite shabbily by the government, and were not permitted to to have Jewish schools and things like that. So that there was again, some of those people, quite a few of those people, moved into other places like Romania and Poland and so on, or whatever. Even Romania had a sort of quite a different language, but moving to any country where the Slavic language, Ukrainian, Belarusian, Polish, you can kind of make the jump there, or even into the Baltic states in some cases. So I just wanted to just talk about that and just put the facts on the table. I don't see any parallel between the alleged refugees of today, this idea that they're all suffering persecution, as this wave of persecuted refugees, and they're the same as the Jews trying to get out of Germany in the 1930s. That is an outrageous and blatant misrepresentation of the actuality. The globalists have decided to push as many illiterate black and brown peasants into the Western countries without asking the people, so that there's not a whit of democracy anywhere to be seen in this. And to force it in there. And if anyone complains or asks questions or provides any pushback, then they're immediately denounced as Nazis and instigators of some new Holocaust. And it's a fucking outrage. Push back against it and don't accept it wherever you hear it. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.